Ladies and gentlemen, this is a meeting that takes place some time after we had the memorial service for Michael Lothian, and we all remain deeply saddened that an organization, the Global Strategy Forum, which was his creation in a very real sense, that he's no longer able to be present. But there was a program of events determined before he passed away, and we're sticking to these events, and I'll have something to say at the end of the meeting so far as the future is concerned and future events. So straight, therefore, to our discussion this morning. And as you know, our guest is His Royal Highness, Prince Khalid bin Bandar, the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia to London. You will know even better than I do, Ambassador, how the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia have had a close relationship that goes back very, very far indeed. And as I discovered when I made my first visit to Saudi Arabia in 1992, just after I'd become Secretary of State for Defense, our ambassador, who's Alan Munro, whose son is in the audience today, the ambassador pointed out that when I met His Majesty King Fahd, not to go straight into a dialogue with him. He would want to just say what he had on his mind about various matters. And then he proceeded to tell me about the relationship between Ibn Saud, the founder of the Saudi state, and Winston Churchill. They had got to know each other well, clearly had huge respect for each other, and the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom has remained strong ever since that day. But the role of Saudi Arabia in the world has changed dramatically in a positive way over those very years. When Winston Churchill knew Ibn Saud, Saudi Arabia had no natural resources that produced huge wealth. It was a country only in formation for the first time in history, and it had an influence at the local level, but not at the national level, international level, I should say. But that has now changed, and particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, it's changed even more dramatically than in the past. So Saudi Arabia is a major financial power, not just in the Middle East, but throughout the world. It is the leading country, and the custodian of the 2 holy mosques is the King of Saudi Arabia. But in addition to that, it is seen as an indispensable country for resolving many of the world's international problems. And so President Trump, on one of his very first visits overseas as president in his current term, chose Saudi Arabia as the main country in the region that he would visit. So enough from me. Our guest knows the United Kingdom very well, not just from the moment he became ambassador here, but he was educated, I believe at school in the United Kingdom, but then at Oxford University, and became an officer cadet, a commissioned officer at Sandhurst. So his credentials to be UK Minister of Defence are slightly better than mine were when I got the job. His career, though, has not been to aspire to be British Defence Secretary. It's been a diplomatic career, and I won't go through the detail, but he became Saudi ambassador to Germany in 2017, and then was appointed ambassador to the United Kingdom in 2019. His subject today is conflict and change, Saudi Arabia's foreign policy in the new global order. Your Royal Highness, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. In fact, one of the first events I attended when I became ambassador was listening to talk here, and I was fascinated by the subject and the openness and the questions and the dialogue. So it's wonderful to be back as I'm about to leave the UK. I'm moving back to Saudi sometime over the summer to take up a role there. So there's a symmetry between start and finish, so thank you for having me. I will try and be very brief and just give you an outline on things as I see it when it comes to security, change in the region, and how that affects Saudi foreign policy, because I'd rather like to engage as much as possible and answer the questions you have rather than lecture you about what I want you to know. That's a dangerous game to play as a diplomat, I can tell you. I've tried it before. Usually it works, but I think this is quite a good crowd to do that with. So thank you once again for having me. If you look at where Saudi Arabia is today, both on the economic side as well as the international relations side, if you like, it's gone through a huge change in the last 10 years in particular. I mean, I would argue the last 100 years has been a huge change in Saudi Arabia, going from a country in 1932 when it was founded that was closer to Saudi Arabia of the 15th century than the 20th century, and today being a Saudi Arabia that's closer to the 22nd century than the 20th century. And I think that puts it into stark perspective, the kind of change we've seen over a long period, but specifically over the most recent development the country has gone through. And our perspective on almost everything we do is very much, how do we create a scenario where we survive? And that is embedded in our mentality as, the Bedouin nomadic harsh climate culture is survival. So if you look at the reason behind what we do, it always is linked to how do we continue surviving going forward into the future. We get criticized for many things. We also get positive criticism, not just negative criticism. But if you don't understand our desire to survive, it's very difficult to understand why we do what we do. And if you look at the changes over the last 10 years, depending on where the criticism comes from, people say, well, Saudi Arabia is doing this to improve its image. Yes, maybe, a little bit. It's doing this because we're great reformers. Possibly. What's at the bottom of it all is how do we create a country and a society that will survive going forward into the future. That is the core. Everything else is an added benefit if it happens. So that's important to recognize at first. Our region, when you look around, Yemen, Sudan, Libya, Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, all countries that are going through massive conflict, change, and difficulty. Some are getting better, some are not. When you're surrounded by that kind of scenario, it is a very difficult place to be. And you look at the last 15 years with Arab Spring, which I always think was an unfortunate way to describe it. Spring has such optimistic, positive connotation. I don't think anyone can really sensibly say that what happened during that period was better for the region. Almost everywhere you look, much worse came out of it, unfortunately. Although, just as a quick aside, I remember at the time people saying, what do you think of what's going on? And my view is, there's a negative and positive in everything. The positive is I'm thrilled to see young people in the Middle East taking their future in their own hands. That's a good thing. Wanting to play a role, wanting to have a say. But to do so without direction is incredibly dangerous. And I say this all the time. Energy with direction is a laser. Energy with no direction is an explosion. And without direction, what you saw in the Middle East was a massive explosion in 2012, and we're still dealing with the fallout of that. So the regional security situation is not ideal, and that's to put it mildly. The economic headwinds that a country like Saudi Arabia has been facing for some time now with not just the global economy, but the change in the basic element in the center of our economy, which has been oil and gas. We know that that is dying out as a resource that we can rely on. And we have to adjust what we do and how we do it if we're to survive again. You put those two things together, you have a country that's suddenly woken up and realized we have a lot of problems to deal with. And by the way, when we started the process of the modern transformation of Saudi, as in the most recent transformation, the world was a much simpler place. You know, you go back 10 years. If I had told me 10 years ago what we would be doing in 2025 and the issues we'd be discussing, I would have thought I was crazy. From Russia, Ukraine, all the way to riots in Los Angeles. Forget about just the Middle East. The whole world is in a funny place at the moment. But before we could begin to address what was happening around us, we needed to address what we were doing internally. And that's where you saw some of the economic change that Saudi Arabia began. And selfishly, we had to look internally. Because if we didn't survive, we couldn't help anyone around us. You have to be able to engage, but in order to engage, you have to be there. And if we were moving down a path which meant Saudi Arabia would find it more difficult to survive, we couldn't be helpful to our region. So we had a very internal looking beginning of this transformation process. And now we are engaging everywhere. And we're trying to engage with a singular 2 points. Singular 2 points probably doesn't make much sense, but with a singular focus on 2 issues, which is stability and prosperity, because we believe that is what brings us the long-term sustainability that we need to survive in the region. And it's not about politics, it's not about ideology, it's not about necessarily religion, although religion is incredibly intrinsic to everything in the Middle East. It is about prosperity and stability. If you have both those things, everything else develops. And we're not doing this in a world where, I get very frustrated with some Western friends of mine who talk about, you should do it like us. I keep reminding them, we didn't have the opportunities to take over the world, conquer it, and become rich that you had 300 years ago. We've got to do it in a different way. And it's a much more difficult way to do it in a world where you're competing as well. So it is a different dynamic, but I think the opportunity in the Middle East is huge. If you look at probably the region with the most opportunity in the world is Africa, without question, in my opinion. Resources, population, location, all of that. But the problems you have to solve for Africa to thrive are really, really difficult. The Middle East also has difficult problems, but it is much closer to thriving than almost any other conflict-ridden region in the world. And so for us to bridge the gap to a really, really pleasant, wonderful place that generates income for everyone in the Middle East is a much closer reality. But we still have equally big problems. And the heart of that, certainly on the economic front, is the Gulf, the center of which is Saudi Arabia because of its size. And it's why Saudi Arabia needs to be encouraged, helped, worked with in order to bring about this change in the Middle East. And it is possible. I genuinely believe it is possible. Optimism is difficult to find, but I have a lot of hope that the Middle East can turn things around because I can see a path to it happening. There are other parts of the world I cannot see the path to success, although it might happen. So I think the Middle East is crucial. And if you stabilize the Middle East, dealing with Africa becomes much easier, much, much easier. And then you can reinvigorate Africa. But it also stabilizes the Middle East. It has a big effect on connecting Asia to the West. Again, you bring prosperity, stability, trade, all these things. Interconnectivity means that conflict between each other becomes less likely because you're reliant on everyone else. Western Europe doesn't go to war with each other, hopefully. Not because it's all Western liberal democracies, but economically it does not make sense to go to war with each other. You lose more by going to war. Other regions where you see conflict is that the conflict is the easier choice. So that's what we need to work against. And with that, I think I'll stop there because I could talk hours about this, but I will let you guys decide what it is that you want to talk about. But that's just a brief overview of where we are in terms of the security of the region and the change that is happening and where it's possible it could go.
Your Excellency, you have been, it's been our privilege that you have been the ambassador of of Saudi Arabia to the United Kingdom now for some 6 years. You are, I understand, likely to end this period of your career, and we wish you well for the future. But you will be able to know, not only have you, I'm sure, made many friends and established many contacts and served your country well, but you, as we have seen today, I'm sure your future career will be as auspicious as it's been up till now. And I very much hope that is a correct prediction, because you have shown that you are one of those diplomats and one of these people who have a deep understanding of the world, and not just a critique of the problems, but have also offered some ways forward to helping resolve them. So could I invite you all to show your appreciation.
Thank you.